On the 6th of March 2015, Lynn Jennifer Gresbeck was driving to her home in Springville, Utah, with her 18-month-old daughter. Lynn would hit a cement barrier next to a bridge, crashing into the Spanish Fork River. The car was not discovered until 14 hours later, when a fisherman spotted it and called the police. Police and firefighters arrived at the scene, diving into the freezing waters looking for any survivors. They saw a person in the front seat, and according to Tyler Beddoes of the Spanish Fork Police Department, they heard a voice saying, "Help me," clear as day. 3 police officers and 2 firefighters heard the voice. Immediately they pulled the heavy water-filled car to the side, only to discover that the driver was dead. The rescuers had no explanation for the voice they'd heard, with Tyler claiming that he wouldn't have believed it if the other rescuers hadn't heard it as well. They described the voice as belonging to that of an adult woman. However, police believe that the voice did not belong to Lynn, since they suspect that she died in the initial crash due to massive trauma. The rescuers turned the car the right way up and discovered the little girl Lily, who had been hanging upside down. Her head, however, was not touching the water. Lily wasn't moving and seemed to be unconscious. They performed CPR and Lily later regained consciousness in a Salt Lake City hospital and would go on to make a full recovery. One Saturday afternoon at the New York Paramount Theater, radio host Long John Nebel witnessed a strange phenomenon that happened to his close friend, a magician named William Neff. According to Nebel, as he was watching Neff, it seemed that Neff's body was becoming minutely translucent, which continued until you could see the traveling curtain clearly behind this transparent figure. Even though he had completely vanished, which shocked the audience, Neff's voice could still be heard, suggesting that he was unaware of what had taken place. Then gradually, a faint outline like a very fine pencil sketch of Neff appeared again, which filled in until the magician completely reappeared again. After the show was over, Nebel rushed backstage, questioning Neff about his disappearance. Neff was surprised, claiming that it wasn't a trick, but admitted that he had experienced that same phenomenon twice before, once in a theater in Chicago while performing a trick, and the other when he was alone with his wife, who was shocked by him suddenly fading away. In all 3 incidents, Neff explained that he hadn't felt any difference with himself as he vanished. On January 14, 1978, in Rostov-on-Don, Russia, 3 18-year-old men, Mikhail Babkin, Nikolai Leontiev, and Vitaly Kravchenko, were in a room at a local sports complex. The men were celebrating the passing of the old New Year. At 6 a.m., the watchman suggested that the young men go home, and accompanied them to the rear exit of the building. The 4 men walked through a long, very narrow corridor with concrete walls and no windows, with the watchman in the lead, followed by Nikolai, Mikhail, and then Vitaly. Mikhail suddenly tripped, despite the concrete floor being smooth. He then screamed and Nikolai turned around, surprised to find that Mikhail's shoulder penetrated into the concrete wall, and in a moment, his entire body had vanished into the wall. The men began examining the walls looking for any doors or openings that Mikhail could have slipped through, but they found only concrete. Mikhail later told his friends about what he had seen. According to him, he entered a small, dark room. To his left he could see a medical examination chair. Across from him was a slightly open door. To his right was a narrow window, through which he saw treetops covered in green leaves, even though it was the middle of the winter. The window seemed to be situated on the 4th floor, even though earlier they were walking through an underground corridor. Mikhail moved towards the slightly open door, entering another room with a similar medical chair. However, this time, the room had no windows. He then continued moving and entered into another room. This room was absolutely dark with some bright areas. Suddenly, Mikhail noticed several black humanoid figures appearing in front of him, faintly lit by patches of light. There seemed to be 5 of them, their heads rectangular in shape. One of the humanoids was hunched over, and seemed to be working on a device shaped like a corn cob with a pointy end, emanating a very bright light. Mikhail then heard a voice in his head saying, "This one." Another voice, also inside his head, answered, "No, not him." The first voice then immediately replied, "Memory erasure is necessary." Frightened, Mikhail rushed out the door and suddenly jumped back into the corridor of the sports complex, hearing a door slamming behind him. Although now, no door was in sight. His friends claimed to have been searching for him throughout the complex for an hour, while he claims that he'd only been gone for 5 minutes. On August 28, 1955, William Rice, a reporter, described a bizarre occurrence that took place in the home of Rose Adenalfi in the Coney Island neighborhood of New York City. According to Rice, a stuffed deer's head hanging on Adenalfi's wall began to cry. The mounted head continued to shed tears for 4 days straight, and then it suddenly stopped with no explanation. A bunch of visitors started visiting Adenalfi's house to see it for themselves. The taxidermist Milton Hoffman was questioned, but he stated that he had prepared the head in the same way he did in his 20 years of practice, with glass eyes and a plaster stuffing, so there was no way the deer could have produced any tears. Some of the people who visited the house claimed they tasted the tears coming out of the deer, describing it as salty, similar to human tears. In 1980, David Swenson of the 3M Corporation describes an anomaly where workers encountered an invisible wall in the area under a fast-moving sheet of electrically charged polypropylene film in a factory. This invisible wall was strong enough to prevent humans from passing through. One person near this wall was unable to turn around, and instead had to walk backwards to get away from the invisible wall. In August of 1980, the factory was working with large rolls of polypropylene film, 50,000 feet long and 20 feet wide. The film was cut and then transferred to multiple smaller spools. The process involved pulling the film off the big roll at high speeds, sending it up 20 feet to overhead rollers, moving it horizontally for 20 feet, and then downwards towards the cutting machine, where it was wrapped into smaller rolls. The whole operation created a cube-shaped tent, with 2 walls and a ceiling approximately 20 foot square. The film moved at 10 miles per hour, and the film surface had been manufactured with different surface structure on each side. When entering the factory floor, away from the machines, Mr. Swenson's handheld electrometer gave a maximum reading of 200,000 volts per foot. When he attempted to walk through the corridor formed by the moving film, he was stopped halfway by an invisible wall. No matter how hard he leaned forward, he was unable to pass through. Mr. Swenson also observed a fly get sucked into the charged moving film, and speculated that the electrical field may have been strong enough to suck in birds. The production manager was skeptical of the whole thing, since when both him and Mr. Swenson returned to the factory floor, the invisible wall was no longer there. The production workers had noticed that this phenomenon occurred in the early morning, when humidity was low. The workers then tried to recreate it another day, and were successful. The electrical field was strong enough to raise the short curly hair of the production manager. The invisible wall had also returned. The production manager then commented that he didn't know whether to fix it or sell tickets.